Her billionaire's baby is crying non-stop on a plane, and nothing seems to calm her down. But what happens when a poor black waitress, with no reason to care, steps in to help? She doesn't just silence the cries. She teaches the billionaire a lesson he'll never forget. In a world driven by wealth, status, and power, one woman shows a man with everything that sometimes the most valuable lessons can't be bought. What happens next will shock you. It's not just a simple act of kindness. It's a life-changing moment that flips everything on its head. How can someone with nothing give the one thing that money can't buy? Stay tuned, because this story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about success, compassion, and the true cost of power. Toy Soup ready to see the unthinkable? The flight was long, and the world outside the plane's windows was nothing but endless stretches of clouds and sky. Inside, the mood was tense, but not for the reasons one might think. In first class, the rich and powerful, accustomed to comfort, tried their best to relax in their spacious, reclining seats. Yet in the corner of the cabin, there was a constant reminder of the chaos of the world outside. A baby's cries, piercing and relentless, echoed through the walls of the plane. Billionaire CEO Jonathan Harrington, the man responsible for over half of the tech world's most successful innovations, sat with his fingers pressed to his temples. His eyes darted nervously to his wife, Catherine, who was trying to calm their 2-year-old daughter. "Ellie?" Jonathan's brow furrowed with frustration, his perfectly pressed suit clinging to his body as the hum of the engines droned on. This was supposed to be a smooth flight to their luxury estate in Aspen, a much-needed getaway. But the baby's crying had already begun to push his patience past its limits. "Why won't she stop?" Jonathan muttered under his breath, his voice low and controlled, but his frustration evident. Catherine, normally calm in these situations, was struggling. Ellie was exhausted, hungry, and overwhelmed by the noise of the plane. It had been a stressful trip, and now her incessant crying felt like a cruel joke from the universe. Jonathan was not accustomed to feeling helpless. He had conquered boardrooms, outsmarted competitors, and crushed deals that were once thought impossible. Yet here, on this plane, in this moment, he was helpless. The baby's cries seemed to mock him, as if the universe had decided that no amount of money or power could fix this problem. "Maybe we should ask the flight attendants for some help," Catherine suggested, her voice tight with worry. But Jonathan shook his head. He didn't want to appear weak. The thought of asking for help from someone beneath him, someone who wasn't in his financial league, bothered him more than it should have. Still, the baby's cries only grew louder. In the back of the plane, in a part of the cabin that was often overlooked, a different kind of person was having a far different experience. Her name was Tamika Johnson, a waitress with a warm smile and a heart full of compassion. Tamika didn't have the luxury of fancy estates or designer clothes, but she had something that Jonathan Harrington had long forgotten, a sense of connection to people, a grounding in the simple things that mattered. Tamika had been working on this flight for hours, serving drinks and meals, smiling at the passengers with a grace that came naturally to her. Her hands moved swiftly, effortlessly, performing tasks she had done 1,000 times. She had learned long ago to be calm, to be patient, to navigate the turbulence of life with a quiet resilience. But today was different. As she walked down the aisle, she couldn't ignore the sound of the baby crying. The cries cut through the air, sharper than the usual noise on a crowded flight. Her heart softened, a maternal instinct kicking in. She paused for a moment, looking over at the family in first class. The baby's cries had become more frantic, more desperate. Tamika noticed the stressed expressions on the parents' faces, the tension in their shoulders. She could see the billionaire's impatience, his inability to fix the situation. It was clear that money and status had failed to resolve this problem. Tamika knew something that they didn't. Sometimes it wasn't about money. It was about understanding, empathy, and the willingness to connect in ways that transcended wealth and power. As she approached the family, she could see Jonathan's frustration spilling over. His eyes were scanning the cabin, looking for any kind of relief, but none came. It was almost as if the universe had conspired to make him feel small. Tamika hesitated for a moment. She was just a waitress after all. What could she possibly do? But something inside her clicked. She had seen the stress, the exhaustion, the helplessness in their eyes. She knew that feeling all too well. She had raised her younger siblings after her mother passed away, working long hours to make ends meet, balancing the chaos of life with grace. The cries of this baby felt like a call for help, a call she couldn't ignore. With a quiet, confident step, Tamika approached the family. She leaned in, her voice soft but firm. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her eyes locking with Jonathan's. "I think I may be able to help." Jonathan looked up at her, his brow still furrowed with frustration. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat when he saw the sincerity in Tamika's eyes. For a moment he considered brushing her off. He was used to being in control, used to people deferring to him. But the sound of the baby's cries seemed to drown out his usual arrogance. "Go ahead," Jonathan said, almost reluctantly. "We've tried everything." Tamika didn't hesitate. She knelt down next to Ellie, her movements gentle. She smiled at the baby, her voice calm and soothing. "Hey there, little one," Tamika murmured softly. "I know you're upset, but we can fix this." Tamika's hands were warm as she reached out to comfort the baby. She didn't immediately try to pick her up or silence her with toys or distractions. Instead, she just sat there for a moment, letting the baby's cries soften in her arms. She rocked gently back and forth, speaking in a tone that was both soothing and authoritative. "Sometimes," Tamika whispered, "we cry because we're scared. Sometimes we cry because we don't know what's happening. But that's okay. It's okay to cry." At first, nothing changed. The baby's cries were still loud, still unrelenting. But then something remarkable happened. Ellie's cries began to fade. Slowly, her breathing became steadier, calmer. Tamika continued to speak softly, her voice an anchor in the storm. As the minutes passed, Jonathan and Catherine watched, their eyes wide with disbelief. What had happened? Was it magic? Was it something they had missed? They had money, luxury, everything they could ever want. But in this moment, it seemed so insignificant compared to the simple act of kindness Tamika had shown. And then, just like that, Ellie stopped crying. She looked up at Tamika, her eyes wide and curious. For the first time on this flight, the tension in the air dissipated. The baby was calm. The family, though still stunned, could breathe a little easier. Tamika stood up slowly, offering a quiet smile to the parents. "It's all about patience," she said. "Sometimes we just need to slow down and listen." Jonathan was speechless. He had always believed that wealth could solve any problem. But in that moment he realized that some things couldn't be bought. Some things were beyond money and power. And Tamika had just reminded him of that. The rest of the flight was different. The tension that had once filled the cabin, pressing in on the passengers like a weight, had lifted. The executives, the wealthy travelers, and even the flight attendants seemed to breathe easier. But as the minutes ticked by, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had just happened. Something that wasn't supposed to happen, at least not for someone like him. As the plane continued its journey through the sky, Jonathan found his thoughts drifting away from his usual concerns about mergers, acquisitions, and the latest tech developments. Instead, he kept thinking about Tamika, the woman who had no reason to help him, no obligation, no incentive beyond kindness. He had been so caught up in his world of luxury, in the belief that money could fix everything, that he had forgotten something crucial. People weren't problems to be solved. They were beings to be understood, to be connected with. Catherine, sitting next to him, had noticed the change in her husband's demeanor. She had seen him try everything to calm Ellie, from the toys to the bottles to the soothing apps he downloaded for his child. But it wasn't until Tamika had stepped in that things had changed. The baby was asleep now, resting peacefully in her mother's arms. Jonathan's gaze softened as he looked at the two of them, his family. The image brought a smile to his face, but the smile was tinged with a sense of something else, something unsettling. It wasn't guilt, but more of a realization, a shift in his mindset. Jonathan leaned over to his wife. "Catherine," he started, his voice lower than usual, "I think we've been missing something." She looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" she asked. Jonathan hesitated, glancing over at Tamika, who was now at the back of the plane, talking with the other flight attendants. "I think we've been so focused on everything we can buy, everything we can control, that we've forgotten how to truly connect with people. Like her." Catherine followed his gaze to Tamika. "The waitress?" she asked. Jonathan nodded. "Yeah, she did something today that I could never have done. And that's what scares me. Catherine's expression softened. She had known for some time that Jonathan's work had taken a toll on their relationship and his connection with their daughter. He had become so absorbed in his empire, so consumed by the need to maintain control, that it was as if he had forgotten what really mattered: family, empathy, connection. "What do you think it means?" Catherine asked, her voice gentle but probing. Jonathan took a deep breath. "I think it means we need to start living differently. I think it means I need to start living differently." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Meanwhile, Tamika was busy with her usual tasks. She moved through the cabin, helping passengers, making small talk and offering smiles. But something had changed within her as well. She had always known that helping others was important, that her job was more than just serving food and drinks. It was about making people feel seen, about offering small moments of kindness in a world that could sometimes feel cold and indifferent. Yet today, as she reflected on her encounter with Jonathan and his family, Tamika realized something even deeper. Her actions hadn't just helped the baby. They had helped him, too. The billionaire had come to her for help, had relied on her, had allowed her to guide him through something he couldn't fix on his own. And in doing so, Tamika had reminded him of his own humanity. Tamika often found herself in situations where she felt invisible. As a black woman in a predominantly white, affluent environment, she knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to be dismissed, to be treated as though she didn't matter. But today, with Jonathan and Catherine, she had felt seen, not because of her job title or her position, but because she had done something that mattered. She had made a difference. As the plane approached its descent, Jonathan felt an unexpected pull to the back of the cabin. He excused himself from Catherine and walked toward where Tamika was standing, folding up the seat belts and ensuring the cabin was prepared for landing. She looked up, surprised to see him standing there. "Tamika," Jonathan said, his voice steady but warm, "I wanted to thank you. What you did for us today, I can't even explain it. You helped us more than you could ever know." Tamika smiled softly, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. She had never expected any thanks. She had simply done what felt right. "I was just doing my job," she said, shrugging slightly as though it were no big deal. But Jonathan's gaze was firm. "No, you did more than that. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten." He paused for a moment, his expression serious. "Io taught me that it's not about how much you can buy or how much power you hold. It's about how you treat people. It's about empathy, connection, and understanding." Tamika felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She wasn't used to being recognized, especially not by someone like Jonathan Harrington. He was a man whose wealth had built empires, a man who controlled the lives of thousands with the stroke of a pen. Yet here he was, admitting that someone like her had taught him something valuable. It was a humbling moment, and Tamika fought to hold back the emotions that threatened to spill over. "Thank you," Jonathan said again, his voice softer now. "I think you've taught me more than anyone else has in years." Tamika shook her head gently. "I don't know about that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm just a waitress. I don't have anything special to offer." Jonathan smiled, shaking his head. "You're wrong. What you have is more valuable than all the wealth in the world. You have the ability to make people feel seen, feel understood. And that's something I've spent my whole life forgetting." Before she could respond, the captain's voice came over the intercom, signaling that they were about to land. Jonathan turned to leave, but stopped for a moment, looking back at Tamika. "Maybe I'll see you around, Tamika," he said. "I'd like to learn more about what you've got to teach." Tamika's heart swelled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. As Jonathan walked away, she felt the weight of the moment settle in. It wasn't just about a broken baby, a crying child. It was about a moment of human connection that crossed boundaries, defied expectations, and opened the door for something more meaningful. The flight landed smoothly, and as the passengers gathered their things, a sense of calm settled over the plane. Jonathan, however, was lost in thought. He had never expected something as simple as a crying baby to change him so profoundly. As the plane taxied to the gate, he looked out the window, the city skyline now coming into view. But it wasn't the familiar image of his business empire, the luxury penthouses, or the bustling tech hubs that occupied his mind. It was the image of Tamika's face, calm and focused, as she had quieted his daughter with nothing more than a gentle touch and a kind word. It had been more than just fixing a problem. It had been an act of empathy, of connection, that Jonathan hadn't known he needed. As the plane doors opened, Jonathan stood still, his mind racing. He had spent years building an empire, creating a brand that was synonymous with success, power, and control. But in all those years, he had never truly understood the value of something as simple as a moment of human kindness. He had always been too focused on the next deal, the next acquisition, the next step forward. But today, in that moment on the plane, he had seen something that could not be bought or manufactured, a sense of humanity that transcended wealth and power. Catherine, who had been quiet for most of the flight, looked at her husband with concern. "John, are you all right?" she asked, her voice gentle but filled with curiosity. Jonathan blinked as if pulled from a deep thought. "I'm fine," he said, offering a faint smile. "Just thinking." He didn't want to tell her the truth just yet, not because he didn't trust her, but because he wasn't sure he could fully explain what was going on inside him. They gathered their things and stepped off the plane, the cool air of the airport terminal hitting their faces as they made their way to the exit. Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he had just experienced a profound shift, but he wasn't sure where it would lead. Tamika, meanwhile, had returned to her normal routine. As the passengers disembarked, she offered her customary smile and thanks, her movements smooth and practiced. But inside, something had changed for her as well. The conversation with Jonathan lingered in her mind, his words echoing through her thoughts. "You taught me that it's not about how much you can buy or how much power you hold. It's about how you treat people." She hadn't expected him to say that, let alone mean it. Tamika knew the world she lived in. She had seen the way people looked at her, the way she was dismissed without a second thought. In a world where wealth and status were everything, she had always felt like an outsider. But now, after that brief interaction with Jonathan, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she had always thought. As she headed back to the flight attendant's lounge to clock out for the day, Tamika was stopped by one of the senior attendants, an older woman named Linda. "Tamika, that was really something back there with the Harrington family," Linda said, a note of admiration in her voice. "You really calmed that baby down like it was nothing. You're amazing, you know that?" Tamika felt a warmth spread through her chest at Linda's praise. It wasn't often that she received compliments in this line of work, and certainly not from the higher-ups. "Thanks," Tamika replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I just did what I could. Sometimes people just need someone to listen." Linda nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Well, you listened and you made a real difference. I don't think I've ever seen anyone calm down a crying baby like that before. Maybe you should be teaching us a thing or two." Tamika chuckled softly, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't help but think of the look in Jonathan's eyes when he thanked her. The way he seemed so lost, so vulnerable in that moment. It was a side of him she never would have expected to see, especially not from a man who ran a multi-billion-dollar empire. She had heard of Jonathan Harrington, of course. His name was synonymous with success, his face plastered across magazines and news outlets. But she had never imagined that, beneath all that power, there was someone struggling, someone who needed a reminder of what really mattered. As the hours passed and Tamika headed home, she couldn't shake the thought of the Harrington family. She thought about how much Jonathan's world must have weighed on him, the pressure of maintaining his empire, the constant scrutiny, the feeling of always having to be in control. It was a world she couldn't understand, but she knew one thing for sure. Even in the richest, most powerful circles, people could still feel isolated. They could still feel lost. The next day, as she walked into the airport for her shift, Tamika was greeted by a familiar face, Jonathan. He was standing by the gate, his eyes scanning the crowd, looking for someone. When he saw her, he broke into a smile and made his way over. "Tamika," he said, his voice warm, "I wanted to thank you again. I've been thinking about what you said." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "I think you were right. It's not about the money. It's about how we treat people. I want to learn more. I want to do better." Tamika was taken aback by his sincerity. Jonathan Harrington, billionaire, CEO, one of the most powerful men in the world, was standing before her, asking to learn from her. It was a moment that felt surreal but also profound. "I don't have all the answers," Tamika said, her voice soft but firm, "but I do know this. We can't fix the world by pretending it's perfect. We have to acknowledge the broken parts, and sometimes the only way to fix those parts is by being real with each other. By listening, by caring. Jonathan nodded, his eyes fixed on hers. I think you've taught me more in a few minutes than I've learned in years. He paused for a moment, as if choosing his next words carefully. I'd like to meet with you, to talk, to learn from you. I think it's time I started listening. Tamika was silent for a moment, her mind racing. She had never imagined that someone like Jonathan would want to learn from someone like her. But the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine desire to change, made her pause. Maybe this was the start of something different, not just for Jonathan, but for her as well. Maybe, just maybe, she had a role to play in making the world a little more connected. I'd like that, Tamika said finally, her smile returning. I'd like that a lot. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings and unexpected moments of clarity for Jonathan. The world he had built, his empire of tech giants and boardrooms filled with ruthless competitors, no longer felt as fulfilling as it once had. He had everything a man could want: wealth, success, influence. But in the moments after that plane ride, he couldn't help but question the price of it all. Tamika had given him more than advice. She had given him a glimpse of something he had lost along the way, the ability to connect, to truly see people for who they were, beyond their wealth or status. It started slow, almost imperceptibly. Jonathan found himself taking longer walks around the city, paying closer attention to the people around him. He noticed the homeless man sitting outside his office building, the young woman struggling with her stroller in the rain, the elderly couple walking hand in hand despite the cold. These were the people who had once been invisible to him, mere background noise in the bustling world of business, but now they seemed to matter in a way he couldn't explain. It was a cold Wednesday morning when Jonathan walked into his office building and was greeted by his assistant Linda with the usual flurry of updates. But today something felt different. Sir, there's someone here to see you, Linda said, her tone a little hesitant. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Who is it? A Ms. Tamika Johnson. She says she has something important to discuss. Tamika. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. He had been thinking about her often in the past few weeks. He hadn't expected to see her again so soon. He had kept his word and reached out, but the pace of his life had made it difficult to prioritize the connection they had started on that plane. Send her in, Jonathan said, trying to mask the unexpected surge of emotion. Moments later, Tamika stepped into the office, her presence filling the room with an energy Jonathan wasn't prepared for. She was dressed simply in her uniform as a waitress, but there was something in her demeanor now, an assuredness, a calm, that made her seem more than just the woman who had helped him on the plane. Tamika, it's good to see you, Jonathan said, standing up from his desk and offering her a seat. What brings you here? Tamika smiled warmly, but her eyes were serious. I wanted to follow up on our conversation, Mr. Harrington. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. She paused, looking around the sleek, sterile office before meeting his gaze. About the broken parts. Jonathan's heart clenched. It was strange to hear someone else talk about the cracks in his world. But here it was, right in front of him, in a way he couldn't ignore. I've been thinking too, Jonathan said, his voice quiet. About what you taught me. Tamika took a deep breath. I'm not here to make you feel better, Mr. Harrington. I'm here because I think there's more to the story, more that needs to be done. I've seen people like me struggle, and I've seen people like you get everything handed to them. But I've also learned something. Things won't change unless someone with power is willing to take responsibility, and I think you're ready to do that. Jonathan stared at her, taken aback. He wasn't used to people speaking to him like this, so directly, so confidently. Most of his peers spoke to him in terms of deals and numbers, but Tamika wasn't talking about those things. She was talking about responsibility, humanity, and the kind of power that didn't come with a price tag. Go on, Jonathan said, his voice steady. He wanted to understand. I've been talking to people in my community, Tamika continued. The ones you never see. The ones who struggle every day to make ends meet. They don't want handouts. They don't want charity. They want opportunity. They want to be seen. They want to know that the world hasn't forgotten about them. Jonathan felt a stir of unease. He had always been able to fix problems with money, with investments, with contracts. But this wasn't something that could be solved with just a check. Are you suggesting that I help them? Jonathan asked, the words almost foreign to him. Tamika nodded. Yes, but not in the way you're thinking. It's not about throwing money at the problem. It's about creating a space where people like me, like them, can thrive. A place where we're given the same opportunities you had, where we're valued for who we are and what we bring, not just what we can buy. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had said. He had never thought about things this way. His life, his entire career, had been built on the idea of creating something from nothing. But now he was being asked to help others do the same. He had the power. He had the resources. But did he have the courage to change the way he saw the world? I'm not sure where to begin, Jonathan said, his voice soft. I've spent my whole life in business. I know how to build companies, how to make deals. But this feels different. Tamika smiled, a small, knowing smile. It is different. But that's the point. You have the power to make a difference. You have the resources to change lives, not by handing out checks, but by creating real opportunities, opportunities that last. You can help build something that will outlast your empire, something that will change the way people see each other. Jonathan stared at her, his mind racing. This was more than just a conversation. It was a challenge, a call to action. He had always prided himself on being a visionary, a leader. But now, for the first time, he was being asked to lead in a way that required him to give something more than just money. I'll do it, Jonathan said, his voice firm. I don't know exactly how, but I will. I'll find a way. Tamika's eyes softened, but there was no surprise in her expression. She had known this was coming. She had seen it in him. He had the potential to change, to do something bigger than himself. Good, Tamika said, standing up. But remember, it won't be easy. It won't be quick. But if you stay committed, if you listen, you can make a difference. Jonathan nodded. I'm ready. I won't back down. If this story moved you, don't just watch, take action. Jonathan Harrington's journey from power to empathy shows us that true leadership isn't about control. It's about connection. Empathy, kindness, and the willingness to listen can change everything. Tamika's simple yet powerful act of helping a billionaire teaches us that humanity transcends wealth, and no amount of money can fix the deeper needs of the soul. You don't have to be rich to make a difference. If you believe in creating a world where kindness matters, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and don't subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of human connection. Together, we can fix what's broken. Let's start today.